cherry picking. It means you deliberately select the best while ignoring the rest. Most of the time, this isn't a bad thing. But when it comes to the Bible, Christians have cherry picking down to a science. In this video, I'd like to look at some of the so-called messianic prophecies about a certain Jesus of Nazareth because I think there are a few tiny details that have somehow avoided detection by our Christian friends. So, I figured I'd be nice and just point out a few of them now. Isaiah 7:14. Therefore the Lord himself shall give you a sign. Behold, a virgin shall conceive, and bear a son, and shall call his name Emmanuel. A very famous verse, but for now, let's just overlook this whole Bethula Alma Parthenos issue. In other words, whether she conceived without sex or whether she conceived in the normal manner. Let's also overlook the problem that the mother names the child Emmanuel, which doesn't sound very much like the name Jesus to me. And let's overlook the fact that Jesus is never actually called Emmanuel in any of the New Testament writings or even the apocryphal ones that didn't quite make it into the official inspired Holy Bible, even though, ironically, Matthew cites this as a prophecy, yet never shows it being fulfilled. Let's do look, however, at the following two verses, because they say more about this special child that is to come. Butter and honey shall he eat, that he may know to refuse the evil and choose the good. Now wait just a gosh darn minute. I don't remember Jesus eating butter or honey, but anyway, let's assume he did. This verse implies that the child does not know the difference between evil and good, and the next verse confirms this. For before the child shall know to refuse the evil and choose the good, the land that thou abhorrest shall be forsaken of both her kings. This sounds like an ordinary human child to me. He has to learn to do good and not bad. So apparently, either this is a prophecy that Jesus will commit sins before he's old enough to understand the difference between right and wrong, or it's not a prophecy about any coming Messiah at all, much less the Jesus we find in the Gospels. And the virgin birth verse has been misinterpreted and yanked completely out of context in order to create another prophecy fulfillment regarding Jesus. And if we continue to read, we'll find another little tidbit that's missing from the Gospels. I'll just use the NIV translation here because it has a pretty clear meaning of what's going on. Then I made love to the prophetess, and she conceived and gave birth to a son. And the Lord said to me, Name him Maher-Shalal-Hashbaz. Seriously? Some may ask, is this the same child we just read about in verse 14? For before the child shall have knowledge to cry, My father and my mother, the riches of Damascus and the spoil of Samaria shall be taken away before the king of Assyria. Same kid. Before the kid matures to know how to talk, before the kid knows right from wrong, King Ahaz's enemies will be overthrown. Well, it looks as if we have two problems here. It looks as if this wasn't a future virgin birth at all. Isaiah had sex with this woman and she gave birth to the child in question and was told to name him Maher-Shalal-Hashbaz. Not only does that not sound remotely like Jesus or Joshua, but this event already happened in Isaiah's lifetime. This was merely a sign to King Ahaz, not a prophecy of some future event that wouldn't occur for another 800 or so years. Now let's have a look at Psalm 69. They that hate me without a cause are more than the hairs of mine head. They that would destroy me, being mine enemies wrongfully, are mighty. Then I restored that which I took not away. For the zeal of thine house hath eaten me up, and the reproaches of them that reproached thee are fallen upon me. They gave me also gall for my meat, and in my thirst they gave me vinegar to drink. Wow! Maybe Psalm 69 is really talking about Jesus of Nazareth. Let's examine a few more verses from Psalm 69. In verses 22 through 24, the speaker is still talking about those who hate him. Let's see what he says about them. Let their table become a snare before them, and that which should have been for their welfare, let it become a trap. Let their eyes be darkened, that they see not, and make their loins continually to shake. Pour out thine indignation upon them, and let thy wrathful anger take hold of them. What What happened to "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do"? This doesn't sound remotely like the Jesus we find in the Gospel of Luke. Jesus wishing harm on his enemies even contradicts what he said in Matthew 5:44 and Luke 6:27. "But I say unto you, love your enemies, bless them that curse you, do good to them that hate you, and pray for them which despitefully use you and persecute you." But it gets worse. "O God, thou knowest my foolishness, and my sins are not hid from thee." Well, well, what have we here? This same Jesus who spoke those other prophetic verses in this chapter is telling us that he has been foolish and sinful. That doesn't sound at all like the sinless Lamb of God to me. Well, let's just ignore this verse and those hateful ones and pretend we didn't see them. Another particular favorite of prophecy hunters is Isaiah chapter 53. It's a veritable portrait of the suffering Jesus, so they claim. Why don't we have a peek at what all the hubbub is about, shall we? Let me read a section that does seem to match up with the Jesus we find in the Gospels. "He is despised and rejected of men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. And we hid, as it were, our faces from him. He was despised, and we esteemed him not. Surely he hath borne our griefs, and carried our sorrows. Yet we did esteem him stricken, smitten of God, and afflicted. But he was wounded for our transgressions, he was bruised for our iniquities. The chastisement of our peace was upon him, and with his stripes we are healed. All we like sheep have gone astray, and we have turned every one to his own way. And the Lord hath laid on him the iniquity of us all." This sounds very similar to our Jesus, at least so far. Let's look at another section. "Yet it pleased the Lord to bruise him. He hath put him to grief. When thou shalt make his soul an offering for sin, he shall see his seed. He shall prolong his days, and the pleasure of the Lord shall prosper in his hand. He shall see of the travail of his soul, and shall be satisfied. By his knowledge shall my righteous servant justify many, for he shall bear their iniquities. Therefore will I divide him a portion with the great, and he shall divide the spoil with the strong, because he hath poured out his soul unto death, and he was numbered with the transgressors, and he bare the sin of many, and made intercession for the transgressors." Well, it's no wonder prophecy hunters love Isaiah 53. It just has to be all about Jesus. Well, let's look at another verse, just to be sure. "And he made his grave with the wicked, and with the rich in his death, because he had done no violence, neither was any deceit in his mouth." He made his grave with the wicked. Okay, so that's why he had to be hanging out with criminals on the cross, and of course the Joseph of Arimathea fiction, that satisfies the buried with the rich part. I mean, those parts certainly do seem to match what we find in the Gospels, but wait a minute. Because he had done no violence? I recall a certain Jesus having a little violence party when he got highly ticked off at the money changers in the temple. Let's just have a look in the Gospel of John and see what happened. "So he made a whip out of cords and drove all from the temple courts, both sheep and cattle. He scattered the coins of the money changers and overturned their tables." Taking the time to deliberately create a whip and attacking strangers in the temple, driving them out, scattering their money all across the temple floor, and dumping their tables over. And not only that, but driving out all of the animals. If that's not violence, I don't know what is. Maybe Jesus' temper tantrum was actually a fulfillment of another prophetic passage from Isaiah. "The Lord Almighty will lash them with a whip." Hey, I'm pretty good at this. I might just have to write my own gospel and fill it with obvious prophecy fulfillments such as this. But we're not quite done with Isaiah 53. "He was oppressed and he was afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth. He is brought as a lamb to the slaughter, and as a sheep before his shearers is dumb, so he opened not his mouth." Twice we're told that this suffering servant opens not his mouth. In other words, He doesn't speak. He doesn't say anything in his defense. Seriously? Let's have a look in John again.